Good afternoon. My name is Fred Mullen. I'm a master gardener, and today we're going to talk about the number one vegetable plant that people grow in their gardens everywhere. If you have a vegetable garden, you're probably growing tomatoes. We're going to talk about how to prune tomatoes and why you should prune tomatoes. This is an indeterminate tomato plant. Now when we're talking about tomatoes today, we're not talking about the patio tomatoes, the little tomatoes that you grow on your back porch or in a window box. We're talking about the big boys, the big tomatoes, okay? The reason you should prune your tomatoes, it's been tested quite a few times at the land-grant universities that by pruning your tomatoes, you're going to get tomatoes 2 weeks earlier in the summertime, and you're going to also increase your overall harvest by almost 50%. Okay, so we're going to talk about why to prune. The first thing you want to do in pruning tomatoes is in this little crutch right here. This is the main stem of the tomato. This is a tomato leaf. Right here we have a sucker, okay? These suckers are full tomatoes. They are true to the parent plant. In other words, if you let this sucker continue to grow, it will grow a tomato plant identical to this one and have same tomatoes. The problem is you only have so many roots in your tomatoes, okay? Your factory is only putting out so much energy. If you let each one of these suckers grow, they'll come from each little armpit here where every leaf is, there'll be a sucker grow. If you continue to allow the suckers grow, you're going to have 6 or 8 growing tips, have a big bush of a tomato with no tomatoes on it yet. Because the plant, first of all, the first thing it wants to do in the spring is grow. The last thing it wants to do in the year is ripen fruit and produce seeds. So when you plant your tomatoes, and as they're growing, you take these little suckers, like this one here, and you just pinch them off with your finger. Just pinch them off and get rid of them. Throw them in the compost pile. Don't take the leaf, just take the sucker. Now, if you go in your garden every day and you've missed a sucker, and there's one on this plant that I let grow specifically for this, if you'll take your knife and cut that sucker off at the joint, take these bottom leaves off and discard them, and take this sucker and plant it in some good growing medium like we have here. Keep it out of the sun for 2 or 3 days and keep it good and watered. This will become a tomato plant identical to this. It'll have the same fruit. Okay. You don't want to do that very often with your tomato plant, because what you're doing is if you let those suckers get big, you're actually taking energy away from your tomatoes. So do it when they're small, but if one gets away from you, or if you need another tomato plant, you can pot it like this, keep it out of the sun for 2 or 3 days, keep it in the shade, keep it watered, and it will root. The reason it roots is on the stem of your tomato there are all types of little hairs. Each one of those little hairs is a potential root. If this tomato falls over and touches the ground, roots will form where that stem hits the ground, okay? Now, you want to sucker your tomatoes, and here I'm taking all the suckers off this tomato plant. This will encourage the tomato plant, after we sucker the entire plant and keep it suckered. You need to do this every day or two. All the energy in the root in this plant, I may have to take a knife. Pinch them out when they're young, but the energy in these roots now have only one growing tip to worry about growing, and the rest of the energy in the roots are going to produce fruit. Okay? After you continue doing this through the life of the plant, continue to sucker. That's your first step in pruning, okay? Step 2 in pruning your tomatoes is more to prevent the early blight. The early blight in tomato plants, the blight comes from a fungus. It's in the soil. When it rains, the soil is beat up on these lower leaves, and the lower leaves absorb that fungus and they get the blight, okay? A way to help prevent that is when you have your first set of blooms, which is here, this tomato and these tomatoes, when this first set of blooms forms tomatoes, you take your knife and you cut off all the leaves from that plant down. What you're doing here is you're eliminating the possibility of dirt being splashed up on your tomato and causing the blight. So now instead of having leaves right here at the soil, our first leaf is clear up here. So it's less likely to get soil splashed up on it. Okay? Another tip. They've done state surveys on this also. The size of a tomato when it's ripe is based on the amount of seeds that are pollinated when this tomato is in bloom. Okay? When the more seeds that are pollinated inside of this little tomato, the larger that tomato will get. That's why you can have one tomato plant, and the first tomato you take off of it may be a ripe tomato the size of a softball. The next tomato you pick off the same plant may be the size of a tennis ball. The reason is there was more seeds pollinated in the first tomato than in the smaller tomato. So to help with the size of your tomato, when your tomatoes are blooming and you have yellow blooms, you need to go around and flip, just with your fingertip, flip the bloom. That will help. A tomato plant does not have male and female flowers. They're called complete flowers. Both male and female parts of a tomato are in the same bloom. So by flipping it, you're going to pollinate more seeds. The more seeds you pollinate within that tomato, the larger the tomato will grow and when it's ripened. Okay? So your first step, keep it pruned from all the suckers. The next step is when you form tomatoes this high up, cut all your leaves off. That's going to help prevent the early blight. Okay? The next step in pruning is later on in the season. This tomato will continue to grow throughout the growing season until the frost comes or it gets killed for some reason. But it'll continue to grow until the frost comes. It will have fruit. It'll put on 2 sets of leaves. It'll have another bloom. It'll put on 2 sets of leaves. It'll have another bloom. It'll put on 2 more sets of leaves, and there's another little bloom here. Okay? It'll continue to do that. Now, 30 days before your last frost in this area, our last frost is October 10th, and the first frost is October 10th in the fall. 30 days before that, I usually tell people somewhere between September 10th and September 15th, you should prune out the growing tip of your tomato. That's the final step in pruning your tomatoes. Prune out the growing tip. That means you're going to have no more blooms the rest of the year. But in that last 30 days, any tomatoes that form during those last 30 days are not going to get big enough to ripen. That throws the plant into ripening what fruit is left. You're going to have green tomatoes up and down the plant, and the tomatoes will ripen quicker because the plant's, all of its energy is going from growing into ripening fruit, and it will ripen your fruit. That's the final step in pruning your tomatoes. Okay? So now you know how to grow bigger and better tomatoes. I'm Fred Mullen, Master Gardener here in Cumberland County. So have a good day, take care of your tomatoes, and enjoy. Thank you very much.